Hey everybody, welcome to week 5. We are well and truly on our way to the mid-semester break at the moment, and this week is really the last where we've got, that's not entirely true. I was about to say it's the last one we've got a full focus more on technology than the ethics part. From next week onwards, we'll move much more into the traditional ethics part, but there is another session, I think week 11, when we're going to be looking at online courts, really as to kind of bookend to pull this all together. What I want to do is really get stuck in, and unusually what my plan is today is to get my PowerPoint working first. Just decided it's not going to. Here we go. Should be all right. What I really want to do is actually start with, I suspect what you're most interested in is, let's talk about Assignment 2, the position paper. By the time this video is released to you, or audio if you're listening to it as a podcast session, then you will have access to Assignment 2. And basically that is an assignment where it's worth 40% of your overall mark. And what you're going to do is you're going to advise your hypothetical employer about some new technology. And I'm going to start with that because I think really working through the assignment first before we get into the guts of the content for this week will really, they go hand in glove, right? We've been doing the work that we've been doing to get to this point. And one of the reasons why I haven't released the assignment to you until this point is because it's going to be really important for you to really understand where we're at and to take stock of what you've learned about technology, the legal profession or legal industry, depending on how you think of it, and the direction that the legal industry is going, and the foundations that have been built up over the last 4 weeks and the content for this week as well are basically what is going to get us there. So, and as you can see, I hope anyway, I've managed to fix my technology issues. So I am working with some slides, and if you are just listening to this, I suggest that you have the slides printed out. Most of them, they're just really to keep me on track, but there are a few that are quite wordy and I think are going to be quite useful to you. So the slide that you can see on the screen now is the one with the heading, start by making some choices. And what I want to be doing with this particular one is just helping you think about this assignment, because it's giving you quite a lot of latitude to really follow down what's interesting to you, which I think is really important when you've got a 40% assessment. So basically, you've got to start with thinking about who do you want to work for, and what kind or kinds of technology are you most interested in? So the choices that you have are to work for a small law firm. I'm just trying to make this work and it's not. There we go. A small law firm, a national commercial law firm, or an in-house practice group. So again, be strategic about this, and really, I'll come back to this as we talk about it, because what we're really looking for here is for you to find a problem that you can fall in love with and that you can write an interesting paper about. So when we start, basically what we want you to do is identify who you work for, and then 1 or 2 at the maximum, but ideally 1 of these bucket list here of technologies. So technology assisted review, deal room or data room technology. So technology assisted review tends to fall on the litigation side, and deal room or data room technologies tend to fall on the M&A side. We've spent quite a lot of time on them, and in particular the ways that they use artificial intelligence. Legg and Bell will help you considerably with understanding these technologies. And again, decide what you're interested in. A document automation platform a chatbot for interacting with clients or answering questions that clients might have or onboarding clients, or technology that's used for the verification of client identities and electronic signing documents. I think I've mentioned DocuSign a number of times as being a technology that just really took off in the period following or during the times of lockdown, but following COVID. Gee, I wish I had shares in that company, let me tell you. Now, one of the reasons I put both of these choices on the same slide is I think you will see that they are related. For example, it is quite unlikely that a small firm that is rurally based will have a significant requirement for either M&A, significant deal rooms, or technology-assisted review transactions. Now, I might be wrong about that. You might see something that I don't see, and completely open to that. But effectively, your task is asking you to solve a problem. You are being asked to make some recommendations to your employer about the adoption, whether or not this kind of technology should be adopted. So, and I'll go into this in a little bit more detail when we move forward, but part of the trick to this is matching and trying to understand what kind of technology is likely to be used by the firm or the type of firm that you've chosen. Now, on the who do you work for firm, I've given a couple of examples. So I've given you an example of a national law firm and a rurally based kind of smaller firm. I've just picked websites randomly, not entirely randomly. I work for Hall & Wilcox, so clearly that's a firm that I know well, and Mary does some work for them as well. So it was kind of easy for us to identify that one as a national law firm. I have literally Googled law firms in Echuca. I just picked that as a town, a reasonably large commercial law firm, and I looked at a couple of websites, and I really liked the Cosgriff Lawyers website. They're clearly open as a firm to using new technologies and thinking about how technology works for them. So I've literally just picked them out of the blue. I haven't told them that I've given them as a recommendation, but when I get back to Australia, my plan is to do that and see if they want to have a chat with us, actually. But let's see how we go. And then the third option is an in-house practice group. And again, I'm thinking about large in-house practice groups. I've suggested an ASX company in a significantly regulated industry. So healthcare, insurance, banking, anything where reg tech might be relevant. Now, you will have noticed that I haven't put reg tech or a particular reg tech offering in the list of solutions that you might look for, because there are three parts to the assignment in a way: understanding who it is that is using this technology and what it's being used for, understanding the technology and what its pros and cons might be, and then linking into the ethical issues that might arise in relation to the use of that technology, so you can make a recommendation: go, no go, go with caveats, no go with caveats, what are your recommendations? And so I purposely didn't put reg tech in there, because there is a risk that we'd end up in this kind of nowhere space where the reg tech is not necessarily legal work that is being done with that technology. And that is something you're going to have to consider: what kind of work will be done by these technologies. Is it legal work? What does that mean from an ethical perspective and from a regulatory perspective? But I didn't want to make it harder for you than it needed to be. So right now, at the very beginning, I would start with what you're most interested in. We have read a lot of assessment submissions in our days, and I'll be interested to know whether Mary agrees with this or not. She may not, but for my money, when a student is interested in the subject matter of the paper they write, my experience is that they do the best work, that they make it much more interesting. And when it's interesting for me to read, it is significantly more likely to do well, because it demonstrates synthesis. You're not telling me the obvious things, the stuff I know already. You're letting your analysis shine, and that is way more interesting for me and way more likely to get good marks. So with that in mind, think about, where do you want to work? Do you want to go rural? Do you want to be in a commercial firm? Can you imagine yourself working in-house? Now, of course, with your legal career, there are so many more options available to you than those three. But they're the three, if they're the only three jobs you have, which one would you choose? And then thinking about what that job might be like and the things that you would need to do in that job, what can you imagine that kind of firm would like, or technology would they be considering, and why? And again, use the websites that we've given you, and I will also provide a couple of extra podcasts actually from that Future of Law podcast, which I've recommended to you before. While they tend to be American examples, I think they're really interesting, and there's a couple that I want to give you in relation to supporting this assignment in particular. One is a now partner of a large international law firm, but was previously a very senior counsel at Facebook. Oh, excuse me. This is what happens when you talk too much. So very senior counsel at Facebook, and the other is a very senior counsel at a New York Stock Exchange listed company that provides safety equipment. And both of them have very different takes on it, but have really interesting descriptions of what it means to be an in-house counsel and how they see the future of in-house counsel going. And these might help you really think about what it might be like to work in-house, and what those interested, what will be interesting, and what relevant technologies there'd be. So ideally you'd start there, because that's probably more interesting to you. However, if it turns out that you're not really sure what it is that you want to do, and frankly, it's not a bad thing to have many options open at this stage of the game, then I would pick one of the bullet points on the right-hand side of the slide here. I would think, well, what technology or technologies are most interesting to me, and then work backwards. Which of the three firms are most likely to use that technology, and why? Now you'll see that I've said technology or technologies. I'm suggesting 2 as a maximum. Ideally, you will just pick one of these and do a deep dive and do it really well. But I can see that it may be that some of you will struggle to really do the deep dive, and you might find that some of the technologies will only work well if they're matched with other technologies, and the other technologies may in fact be something that's on the bullet points here. So I really don't want you to scattergun. I'm not looking for something that is shallow and superficial. We are really looking for you to go deep, to be really analytical, to really think the issues through. So I would strongly recommend, as much as you can, to concentrate on one, but if you just can't find enough, then make it 2. Or if you can't find enough, or you can't see how the technology you've chosen can work in a standalone environment, it is perfectly appropriate and reasonable to talk about the other technologies that it would need to interface with and work with. So basically you're writing a position paper. I know in your law degree you're asked to write memos all the time, and a position paper is kind of like a memo, and it's definitely a document that's going to go to the management, and you're being asked to really make some recommendations. Should we be looking at incorporating these technologies into the way we work? If so, should we be doing it now, in the medium term, or in the longer term? You've been given a number, 6 in fact, specific things to think about. So, and I'm going to go through each of these, not necessarily in this order, but each of these one by one. But it is absolutely worthwhile printing out this slide or printing out the guidance note for doing this assignment, and before you hand it in, actually ticking off, making sure that you have in fact answered all these questions. Now, don't get me wrong, I'm not suggesting that you use these as headings. I mean, you can if it's useful to you to use them as headings, but I think there are more elegant ways to write about this particular issue. But I want to make sure that it is really clear that you've answered these questions. So I want to understand what the problem is that this technology is going to solve. So let's say that you've picked, let's go back, the first 2 on the list, small law firm, technology assisted review. I want to know, why does a small law firm need technology assisted review? What kind of matters or kind of circumstances this is going to be useful in? Is this really going to be something that we would seriously actually consider? In working out what problem it solves, you really need to go deep into the problem, which is why we are further suggesting that you answer whether adopting this kind of technology is going to actually solve this problem or not. Is it going to address the whole problem or only part of it? What is it going to think about? Now, problem is a big word, right? Well, it's a short word, but it's a big concept. Problems can be algorithmic in nature. I've got a leak. I can see where the leak is. I put tape around the pipe. Problem goes. That putting tape around the problem, tape around the leak is the solution to my problem, my leaky pipe. The kinds of problems that these technologies solve, I want to make sure that you are really clear on what they are and whether they're just single leaky tap type problems or whether they are complex, multi-layered problems. Now, when we're thinking about the legal, whether we call it the legal industry or whether we call it the legal profession or it's part of both, we've got a whole lot of moving parts here, and hopefully that's come out in the lectures so far. We've got people and systems, we've got cultures, we've got different ways of approaching ethical frameworks, we've got ethical rules and regulations, and we've also got the complexities of identifying and making sense of the law. And so which of these or other problems are we actually trying to solve, and will we be solving them all? I also want you to be really clear on what the expected benefits for the employer would be of adopting this relevant technology, and if the problem isn't solved entirely, what elements will remain, what will still be a problem, or what new problems are likely to come up if this technology is adopted. Now, Legg and Bell will be particularly helpful to you with that because all of the readings, they do tend to focus on artificial intelligence, but they are really looking at the ways in which artificial intelligence is being used in the profession. Also, I know I sound like such a fangirl, don't I? We keep coming back to Richard Susskind, and Richard Suskind's Future of Law text will also really help you dive into that. But another way to look at this is go and have a look at the websites from the various vendors who are selling these kind of solutions. See what it is that they say their solutions offer and the nature of the problems that their solutions address. Don't just repeat them blindly, and to the extent you do repeat them, make sure that you reference and credit where you've learnt this particular idea from. Think about it, analyze it, think about what that would actually mean in practice. And if you are in the fortunate position where you can talk to somebody who's in practice, or you can use some of these podcasts or other resources that we're sharing with you, absolutely reference those as well. Then the last thing that you just need to make sure that you are looking at, and I want to use the cliche, last but not least, because it's certainly the furthest from least. If you look at the assessment rubric, the focus really needs to be on identifying the ethical implications of the technological response that you are considering, specifically focusing on any ethical and professional obligations that need to be considered when you're using this technology. Now, this paper is due in week 10, and we are about to start the deep dive into the ethical issues now. You have some of the ethical frameworks already. You've done a lot of work about thinking about what your natural response to the ethical dilemmas might be. But really, in this paper, we're now going to have to get stuck in and look at the rules, look at the cases, think about the analogies, the extent to which certain things have been done manually or by individuals before and then might move into the technology regime or realm. What does that mean for upholding ethical standards? Now, clearly we haven't got there yet, and this is the nature of these things. It's not due until week 10. By week 10, we will have covered absolutely all the rest of the ethical hierarchy material. But it may well be, to be strategic and to give yourself plenty of time, that you want to think about a technology that might be really focused in on the relationship that lawyers have with their clients. Again, just to be strategic, because from next week onwards, we are going to be focusing on the duties that lawyers have to their clients. So by the end of week 7, you should be relatively on top of the law in relation to that space, and that can be inspiring the way that you think. Now, if you, don't let me limit you here. I'm really just giving you some strategies to do the best job that you can do. But really, we would like you to consider the range of ethical obligations, what the requirements are, and to think through what this means from the day-to-day use of these technologies, the implementation of these technologies, the way in which we approach using them. But as always, it is so much easier to do that when you've got a grounding in the law. Reading ahead and being prepared for your lectures in advance, well, why wouldn't you? It's always a rewarding and one of the best ways that you can study, absolutely, but it will help you with thinking about this assignment and finalising it. So let's move on. One of the key questions that you're being asked is, what is the problem that this proposed technology solves? And I've got a whole heap of examples on the slide. So let's actually think about some of these. Now, this is an example list. It is certainly not a complete list. There are many other problems that that the technologies might also address. Again, we want you to go deep and hard rather than to be broad and shallow. So again, for that reason, it might make sense for you to focus in on one or two of them in order to really address those deeply, and maybe mentions others that are relevant, if they are, at a higher level. At the end of the day, what's really important here is being really focused in on the problem. And my little love heart symbol there is to remind me to tell you that it's kind of counterintuitive, but the way to do well in an assignment like this is to go deep on the problem, to really fall in love with the problem rather than with the solution. And so for those of you who may not be aware, in part of my life I do quite a lot of design thinking consulting consultancy. So design thinking is sometimes called human-centered design or systems design, various versions of the problem-solving approach. But essentially, let's call it design thinking for now. Design thinking is an approach to solving problems that are complex, systematic, or the literature would call them wicked problems. And you've come across in your reading some of that reference to wicked problems. The idea of a wicked problem goes back to the early 1970s in a seminal paper that was written by two academics, Rittel and Weber, that they were actually town planners, believe it or not, and they basically identified the kind of problem that really ultimately is unsolvable. Problems that by their very nature, the lens that you look at them through impacts the way that you think about them, and that anything you do to try and solve the problem actually changes the nature of the problem itself. So a good example of that is, say, if we're thinking about drugs, the drug problem, we might look at it through a mental health lens. We might look at it through an addiction lens. We might look at it through a crime lens. Depending on the approach that we take to the problem, that impacts the way that we decide to choose solutions and the way that we implement those solutions, and the very phrasing or framing of a problem in a particular way affects the nature of the problem that itself. So my advice to you is to try to fall in love with the problem rather than with the solution, to really try and empathize, to get yourself into the mindset of somebody in the employer that you've chosen, to really kind of understand, well, what are the pains that they experience on a day-to-day basis? What are they trying to actually achieve? What are the jobs that they need to get done that are difficult to do or impossible to reproduce, or boring or inefficient or time-consuming or just not cost-effective, and as a consequence they're not servicing their clients in the way that they want to? Really kind of go deep on that, and then you will, because you love your problem, you will have a healthy skepticism and an open-mindedness about the solution. You can then find different variations of the kind of solutions that are available, and you can start to think about, well, what recommendations do I need to make? Is this the right kind of technology all up? If it is, what kind of features and benefits would we need to see in order for it to work for this organization? What kind of questions would we need to ask? You'll end up, because you love the problem, having significantly better recommendations and better thoughts about the task itself. The next question that's really important here is, it's quite unusual for one solution to solve every problem that an organization has. And because these solutions are likely to address complex or wicked problems, it may well be that the technology or the addition of another technology is only going to add to the problem base. So it's really important to think, and this kind of very clumsy icon on the slide is basically supposed to be an iceberg. I'm asking you to go underwater and see what holds up this problem. If we get rid of the top of the iceberg, what's going to happen? Is another problem going to pop up above the surface, or will we eliminate the problem altogether? What new problems, particularly human-centered problems, are likely to arise if we adopt this technology? And by the way, it's absolutely okay to, in fact, it's encouraged to think about what the adoptions of the technologies mean for the lawyers doing the day-to-day work of lawyering in that particular situation. How does that impact the way they feel about themselves and the work that they do? How does it impact the logical approach that they take to doing work? So in order to do this, one of the things that I would strongly recommend that you do is think about the jobs that your lawyers need to do. This is actually the slide that you can see. Don't worry too much about the detail on it, but it's just reminding me as much as anything else. Clayton Christensen, who I've mentioned before, he's the father of disruption, effectively. He's a Harvard professor, scholar who's been around for a very long time, and he came up initially with this, what we call JTBD, or jobs to be done theory. I'm going to add a video of his. Actually, I'm going to edit it in right here. So I'd like you to meet your friend and mine, Clayton Christensen.
To give you an illustration of how we develop this in a deeper way, McDonald's approached us. And McDonald's is a very sophisticated marketing company. And they have data up the kazoo. And they decided that they needed to innovate in their milkshake product line so that more people will buy milkshakes. And they had data that allowed them to draw a quintessential customer of milkshake customers. And they then would identify this profile of a milkshake customer. It turns out I fit that profile very well. They would then invite people who hit the profile into conference rooms, and they'd ask them questions, trying to understand how could we improve the milkshake so you'll buy more of them. And they'd get very clear feedback. They would then improve the milkshake on those dimensions of performance, and it had no impact on sales or profits whatsoever. So we invited ourselves, and they agreed that we could try to approach it in a very different way. And that is, there's a job out there somewhere that arises in people's life on occasion that causes them to need to buy a milkshake. And we need to understand what the job is that causes people to buy a milkshake. And so one of our colleagues stood in a McDonald's restaurant for 18 hours one day and just took very careful notes on what time did he buy the milkshake, what was he wearing, was he alone or with other people, did he buy other food with it or just the milkshake? And did he eat it in the restaurant, or did he go off in the car and take off? It turned out that about half of the milkshakes were sold before 8:30 in the morning. It was the only thing they bought. They were always alone, and they always got in the car and drove off with it. So we came the next morning and confronted and positioned ourselves outside the restaurant so that we could confront these people as they were emerging with their milkshake. And in language that they could better understand, we asked them, "Excuse me, you're creating real trouble for me because can you explain what job arose in your life that caused you to come here at 6:30 in the morning to hire a milkshake to get this? What's the job to be done here?" As they would struggle to answer why they came at 6:30, we'd ask them, well, step back a minute and think about the last situation in which you had the same situation, needing to get the same job done, but you didn't come here to hire a milkshake from McDonald's. What did you hire to get the job done? And one guy said, yeah, I hire donuts to do the job, but I can never hire just one. And another guy said, I do bagels, but boy, they're dry and they're tasteless. And so I have to put cream cheese on and steer the car with my knees while I'm putting cream cheese on. And it turns out, one of them said, I hired a Snickers bar to do the job, but I felt so guilty. I've never hired Snickers again. And one guy said, I never thought about it before, but last Friday I hired a banana to do the job. But it doesn't do the job very well at all. You finish it in less than a minute. But let me tell you, when I go to McDonald's, it is so viscous. It takes me about 23 minutes to suck it up that thin little straw. And I don't care what the ingredients are. All I know is that when 10 o'clock comes, I'm still full. And the job that all of these people were trying to get done was I have a long and boring drive to work. And I needed something that would just keep me engaged with life while I'm driving the car. I'm not hungry yet, but I know I'll be hungry by 10 o'clock. So I also, part of the job is, I need something to eat that would keep myself full when 10 o'clock happens. And that's the job that they're hiring the milkshake to do. And that is, they have a long and boring drive to work. And they needed to add dimensions of it to keep them engaged with life. And from the customer's point of view, the milkshake does the job better than any of the competitors. And the competitors from the customer's point of view are not just in the product category, but they draw from bananas and donuts and bagels, as I mentioned. And so when you think about how big the job is, you have to look at who the real competitors are from the customer's point of view. And they come from very different categories. How big is the market for milkshakes? It's a serious question. Well, who knows? But the size of the milkshake just isn't the sum of the milkshakes of Burger King, Wendy's, and McDonald's milkshakes. But it includes, from the customer's point of view, all of those other attributes of bananas, donuts, bagels, Snickers bars. And when they implemented this insight in the portions of America where they developed it, it turned out to be seven times bigger than they had thought when it was marketed only by the attributes. And most markets are characterized that way. There is a lot of non-consumption. And you can understand how to improve it only if you understand the job to be done.
Okay, so it might seem a little bit odd to be comparing milkshakes and legal problems, but I think that in that very brief video that Professor Christensen really points out what matters here, that sometimes we can think that we're solving a problem and we're very clear on what the problem is, but often what we're actually solving is a symptom. And it's going to be really important to do well in this assignment to kind of really pare back and think about, why is it that lawyers do this particular task? What is the problem that this task solves? Not just how can the technology help with the task. And I guess, again, I've got another slide for those of you who are following along listening with a picture of a drill on it. And I think this is kind of helpful to think about it. It's like nobody ever goes to the shop because they want a drill, like a power drill. Nobody ever does want a drill. What they want to do is put together a baby cot or a bookshelf or hang a picture on the wall. They want to drill a hole. And that's why they go and buy a drill. And then they don't just want to drill a hole for the sake of drilling holes, though I suspect there are people out there who do. They want to drill a hole for a purpose. And as you keep going in and working out what the purpose is, you get a much better understanding of what's the real problem we're trying to solve. And I think this is really important because as lawyers, we can get a bit full of ourselves, to be perfectly frank. And I think we need to understand that nobody wakes up in the morning thinking, gee, I'd love some legal advice today. I'd love to spend some time with a lawyer. They don't have legal problems as such. They have problems that have legal elements to them. And Similarly, when we're thinking about lawyers, no lawyer really just wants a technology tool. Like, I would just love to have a new automation system or technology-assisted review system or a new way of filing my emails. People don't want that. What they want is to do their job effectively. And this actually goes back, you can link this if you want to, if you're interested in thinking about it this way, to that whole discussion about, are we talking about a legal profession or a legal industry? What is the business of law? And what things do we do because it is a business, because it is an industry? And what things do we do to serve our community as part of a profession? And so the language that in a design thinking or an entrepreneur or entrepreneurial basis we might use is to really try and understand what pain do we need a pain reliever for, and what gains are we looking for that will help us understand what it is that lawyers do. The next slide, if I can make it turn. The next slide, for those of you playing along at home, is a possibly somewhat grainy image of a canvas or a model that has been put forward by Alex Osterwalder and others from Strategizer. In a subsequent video today, I'm going to talk very briefly about the business model canvas and introduce you to that as potentially a useful way of thinking about this assignment as well. But as a kind of model, I think this is a really useful way of thinking about what it is that we are trying to do with the tools. And I think you might find it a really useful model for analysing the tools themselves from a practical point of view. So you will see on the slide here that there is a part that deals with this, what are the customer jobs? Now, the customer here might be the lawyer themselves, or it might be the lawyer's client. Once you understand what the real problem is, you'll have much more clarity around that. But what is it that they are really trying to do here? And when you've actually identified what the problems are, you're in a position to identify both the pains that they experience and the gains that they are looking for. So once you've done that, the trick is then to actually look at the product or the service, the technology in this case that you're interested in, and maybe a number of different variations of that technology, and look at the features that they have to identify, well, how do they create these gains that are needed to satisfy this requirement for the features or the benefits that a customer is looking for? And how do they relieve the pain that the customer is experiencing? And being able to map this is a pretty simple way for you to get a pretty strong feel for how these technologies will help alleviate the pains and provide the gains. In other words, solve the problem that you have already fallen in love with. Now, part of the assignment asks you to articulate the expected benefits of using this technology. Now, this can look like just another way of saying, well, what are the problems that it solves? But I think having the discipline to think about those things differently as separate questions will help you really think about the way that the technology might be used in practice and what that actually means for the humans that are involved. And so again, I want you to remember that you're in love with the problem, not with the solution, that you've been asked to make a recommendation about whether this is a kind of solution that should be implemented, which really means you have to focus on the question, is this a solution to a problem that this particular practice has? And so again, I've just got a snapshot, 9 different types of benefits that you might be able to see. But again, keep going deeper and don't be afraid to think about what the benefits could be for the humans that are involved in the use of these technologies. Now, One of the things I really want to point out is that it is very clear on the assignment that you are not expected to work out what the pricing would be, what the costs would be of implementing this type of solution. You're not being asked to do a cost-benefit analysis. But at the same time, I think the model, again, sorry for those listening at home, please make sure you've got the slides with you. I think there are really 3 questions that we're always going to be asking. And again, the model that you see on the slide comes again from Alex Osterwalder and Bland as well from Strategizer and from their excellent book about testing business ideas. I would always start with desirability. Desirability is really the question of, does our customer want this? So when you're thinking about the jobs that the lawyer or the law firm that you're imagining needs to do, what I want you to be doing is asking yourself, what is it that the end user actually wants? What do they need to get the job done? If they don't need this, then you've already got your answer. This is not a useful technology for those reasons. The next question goes to feasibility. Can it do the things that they want? So often this is phrased on the slide as can we do it, because it's a model that's often used by entrepreneurs and intrapreneurs to assess whether or not they've achieved value and what we would refer to in an intrapreneurial or entrepreneurial venture or an innovation space as product market fit. Now, you don't need to go into that level of detail, but I think you do need to make an assessment. Does this technology or some iteration of this technology do the things that this particular customer wants? And then the question about viability. Now, I cannot say it often or loudly enough. I am not asking you to do any kind of cost-benefit analysis. But the question about viability is really the question of, should we do it? Now, often that's going to be a financial question to an extent. Is it going to save us more money than it costs us to do? Or do we need to spend, would we be spending more money doing this thing we need to do in another way? Viability is definitely a financial question, but you're not being challenged with that. It's just too hard to get the data and it's not really on point for what it is you want to learn. But I think we can think about viability in the sense of the ethics and in the sense of its ongoing impact on legal, whether that's the profession of law or the business of law or both. That you can be thinking about, well, what does this mean for the nature of and the way that we practice in the profession? And is it something that is viable given the ethical frameworks that we need to work in? And what kind of considerations would we need to have to ensure that we can make sure that if we want to use this technology, that we maintain our duties to our clients, or our duties to the court, or our duties to the profession? Where are the risks that we might not? Because if there are risks that we can't mitigate or plan for, then this kind of technology will not be viable in the long run. Now, I don't want you to spend too much time worrying about the next slide that I have on the screen for those of you listening at home. Essentially, it's a diagram, again from Strategizer, from Bland and Osterwalder, which is looking at the way that we think, a really good way for thinking about the adoption or the development of new technology. So if we think about the x-axis on a diagram as being time, progress over time, and we think about the y-axis as being the level of certainty we have that something is going to work. At the beginning of a project, and you can think about this at the moment for you as being the beginning of the project by your employer to consider this kind of technology. At the beginning, it's really uncertain. And so it's actually not a good idea to put a lot of resources into understanding it, testing it, thinking about how it works. This is why at the beginning we've got the most junior lawyer, the law student, if you will, actually making an initial assessment, least cost, early stage. As you become more certain about the benefits of a technology or the benefits of an innovation over time, you find that you are making more complex tests and involving more resources in terms of time, money, people in the decision making and the implementation process. So all I wanted to do is just show you this simple model to think about it, because it might inspire you to think about, well, if you're making these recommendations, what would the next steps be for the law firm or the in-house practice? What kind of testing might they need to do? How might they need to think about the rollout or the implementation? And what might the people elements of this particular technology be? Again, focus on the ethics. That is going to be the most important thing, but I'm trying to identify ways that you can think about this. It'll help you do well on the assignment, but also put you in good stead to start thinking about technology in useful ways as you go out into the profession. So almost there for this particular offering, and I'm sorry this is a longer video than I usually like to do, but I'm trying to get some content and get the assignment material in your heads at the same time. So with the assignment, 2,000 words plus or minus 10%. You do not need to count your footnotes, and you do not need to count your reference list. If you have diagrams that have words in them, I'm not going to count those either. Again, this is a position paper. It's something that's being looked at by the business of your law firm or your legal practice. So it needs to be written in a way that is useful for a business audience. While I think it's going to take you at least that 1,800 words to do a good job of this, mostly people are going to turn off by the 2,000 words. You need to keep it pithy, short, to the point. And the irony of saying that in one of the longer videos that I prepared for you is not lost on me. Secondly, something I think is really important here, you're not writing a mystery novel. We do not want to be waiting till the last paragraph to work out what your recommendations are. Your boss wants to know up front, what is the answer to their question? What are the highlights? So include an executive summary or a really clear introduction. Don't leave us hanging. Don't leave us guessing. I've said it before, I'm going to say it again. You are not doing a cost-benefit analysis. We're interested in the desirability and the feasibility elements. We are not interested in viability in terms of money. We are interested in viability in terms of ethics, but not in terms of money. Also, make sure you answer the questions. Have a printout of those questions available and tick them off as you go. They don't need to be answered in that order. I'm not interested in seeing those headings there, but make sure that you answer the questions clearly. Your audience is your employer. You can assume that your boss is a partner of a law firm or the general counsel in an in-house setting, so they are interested in what the law is. They will want to know what the cases are. They will want to know what the relevant regulation is. Again, you can assume that it is Victoria only as jurisdiction. There may well be crossovers in some way that you want to think about, but that is not crucial. There is no trick question here. Now, the last two bullets or tick points, checkpoints on this slide are, what are the ethical issues, and how is the technology going to be used? The guts of your paper, the most important thing in this position paper is going to be, what are the ethics? If we adopt this technology, how is this going to impact the way that we uphold our duties to our clients, to the courts, to the profession? These are absolutely key in making sure that you pull together these two strains. Now, I know right now listening to this, you really haven't done any kind of deep dive into the ethics piece yet, but we will over the coming weeks. And so this is not an assignment that you're going to really be easily able to just get done during the break and then put it aside and sail through to week 10. But you should be able to write it and do quite a good job weeks 8 and 9, leaving week 10 to do a good proofread, bit of navel gazing and thinking about it. I think I said this earlier on. If you really focus in on the ways these technologies can impact duties to the client, I think that will be a very smart way to do it, and you can think about that in some detail. And so I just want to remind you that it will be relevant to sort of circle back to this hierarchy of lawyers' duties. And at the high level, you can start thinking really early on about how using these technologies might impact the lawyer's duty to obey the law, duties that they have to the court, duties that they have to clients, and the duties that they have to others. And as you recognize where they might fit, that will give you a research basis to look at the law, but also it'll put you on high alert. Your ears will prick up as we talk about these topics over the coming weeks. I want to remind you too about the Lawyer's Compass and the work that you've already done with identifying your own ethical framework. There's some really, I think, actually thinking about these law firms or the practice that you pick, the in-house practice that you pick, seeing what you can see on their websites or in, if you just, any company, say you pick National Australia Bank or Wesfarmers, or Wesfarmers are not highly regulated, NIB or an insurance company or something, go and have a look at their website, see what they say their values are. Assume that the legal practice or the in-house counsel's department, the legal department, will share similar values. You might even be able to find out what those values are if you look hard enough, and think about those in terms of the ethical framework and use that to inform the way that you write and you frame your assignment. So I should have had Parker and Evans open while I was just talking about that, the slide on Parker Evans, but think about the approach, think about what it means, and you'll be able to write something that's really interesting, and I think you'll get a lot out of doing it. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the future of legal practice in the next video. Good luck with your assignment. There will be a discussion group open for you to share questions, concerns, frustrations, and of course compliments. And I'm looking forward to reading them, as I know Mary is too. Take care.